Here we are. Welcome to Borderland Beat Vlog. It's been quite a while since we've done a show, but we figured we'd fire it back up because there's still interest out there about what's going on in the world. Our guest, we've had him on before, goes without saying. You need no introductions, but it's Mike Vigil, retired DEA, several years with the federal government doing tracking down the bad hombres back in the day, 70s, 80s, 90s. And now you're still doing it in the retired life, tracking down, helping law enforcement catch bad guys and tell cool stories. So, welcome to the show once again.
Well, thank you so much, and it's a privilege to be here. Simply because I think that you guys are doing a tremendous public service by, identifying issues that there's a tremendous public interest in, and I look at it as an educational process because a lot of people really don't know what's going on in the drug world, how it impacts them. So I think, for their benefit, I think it's a great program that you put on.
Well, thank you. We're gonna wait for some people to log on and tune in and check us out. I don't know. Um, I don't know how long have you been retired now? It's been several years. I
I
mean,
retired in 2004. And, since then, I've been writing books. I do a lot of television episodes, Gangsters, America's Most Evil, on the Reels channel, documentaries, and then I'm interviewed almost on a daily basis by internationally syndicated newspapers, television networks. So it keeps me busy.
so when you first decided you wanted to be in law enforcement, DEA wasn't your first choice. I'm assuming you started out as a beat cop on the street somewhere, or did you go straight into the DEA? How, how
I,
how did this work?
it's kind of interesting, Mark, because I graduated from New Mexico State University and I applied for a number of, state police jobs, federal law enforcement. And the one that really piqued my interest was actually the DEA, because at that time, DEA was the only agency that had a foreign charter as well as a domestic charter, because FBI only domestic, as CIA foreign. And then the other thing that was of great interest to me was, the cat and mouse game of working undercover. And that really, really, really pushed me into the DEA.
So undercover it is. I mean, it's working undercover. You're taking on a whole new personality, a whole new life.
Mhm.
Nobody knows. Nobody's supposed to know who you are. You can't even tell your loved ones and friends, family. You just become a ghost basically, and that's the best way to keep your cover, I guess. And you lived that life for pretty much your entire career.
Pretty much. And to me, it was a James Bond lifestyle because, one day I'd be in Buenos Aires working undercover. Then all of a sudden I'd be in Rio de Janeiro. I was all over the place, and it was very interesting. I loved the lifestyle, but as an undercover agent, you have to be really, really, really careful because all of a sudden you start to live on that adrenaline high, and to get a higher adrenaline high, you take more risk. So you have to learn how to curb that, because if you don't, you're probably going to get killed.
Yeah, that makes sense because I guess living that dual personality, you one of your personalities thinks they're in a superhero and you can do anything and you can't get hurt, and
Hmm.
I guess you kind of
Hmm.
take on that persona. So you got to be careful about how you go about doing your job because you could take some unnecessary risks and get yourself in a lot of trouble. And you
And
can,
the other thing too, Mark, is that you had to be really, really calm. And I was always very deadly calm. The greater the danger was, the calmer I was, because I knew that, when you start to get nervous or you start to get apprehensive, you start to make mistakes. And one of the things that happens is is I see all these situations where people say, oh, I infiltrated a motorcycle gang, or I infiltrated these individuals that were laundering money, or what have you. But there is no dangerous of a predator than a drug trafficker. These people are the most dangerous creatures on the planet, and then they all suffer from extreme paranoia. So they're always testing you, and if they see a bead of sweat on your brow, or you mix up the story, they'll kill you. These guys are not going to fool around.
And I mean, it's almost natural to be nervous when you're dealing with these kinds of people because the reputation precedes them. I mean, everybody knows they're ruthless people. We've all seen the videos of they eat each other, they cut each other's heads off, they burn each other alive. They have dogs eat them. I mean, it's the brutality is just stuff that is unheard of, and so they get that reputation, and dealing with them has got to be just automatically your nerve level, and you are not the in control. It seems
Well,
like.
well, the thing is that when I worked undercover, I would have been a good gunfighter, because the thing is that when you take a look at the best gunfighters in the old West, they were the ones that maintained a calm, and they always got the shot off. It was a straight shot. The other ones got nervous, and they'd be shooting to the sides, up or down, because they were so apprehensive. But I maintained my calm. And in those days, and even now, there's not a lot of DEA agents that work undercover. There was very few. And in my heyday in Mexico and in Colombia, I would go and work undercover solo many times, because you couldn't take backup, because they if they saw surveillance, that you were probably going to be gone. So it was better for me to go into the jungles and into the mountainous areas to meet these traffickers by myself and negotiate. And then I would bring in the Mexican federales or whoever, once the delivery was going to take place, but not before that. And there were not too many people that were willing to do that.
That's an incredible career, incredible dynamic that you worked. I want to let everyone know that Mr. Vigil, you've been very gracious to agree to answer some questions if we get any that are relevant. We're going to try to answer some questions here,
Sure.
but do I want to talk a little bit about what's going on currently in Mexico that,
Okay.
that you've heard. Let's get into current events. Who's in control? Who's what the heck's going on out there right now?
Okay. Well, in Mexico, we're having a lot of issues. And when I say I'm talking about the U.S. government in terms of counter-drug efforts. During this sexennial, or this 6-year administration under Juan Manuel López Obrador, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, things have not been going very well. And one of the things that occurred in October of 2020 is the DEA arrested Salvador Cienfuegos, who was the former Secretary of Defense under the Peña Nieto administration from 2012 to 2018, more or less. And the Mexican government petitioned his return, and they approached Bill Barr, Marcelo Ebrard, who was the foreign minister, and he said, look, if you don't give us Cienfuegos, then it's going to really demolish bilateral counter-drug efforts. And Bill Barr was highly political, and it was really a no-no, because it was unheard of. I had never seen anything like that. And they dropped the charges on him, and that Mexico agrees that they are going to investigate him. But once he's returned there, they don't arrest him. And I knew they weren't going to charge him, so they do a 2-month investigation, which is nothing. And then, they take some of the evidence that was given to them by the U.S. government, not all of it, but the investigation was very superficial. And then they declared that the evidence that had been provided to them was insufficient, that, there was not enough evidence. And, it was all, pretty much nonsense. And then, in violation of the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, they released the evidence that DEA provided them. And Cienfuegos had been taking money from a cartel known as H2, which was an offshoot of the Beltran Leyva organization. And so then afterwards, they started to accuse DEA of fabricating the evidence, which was, again, nonsense. And Gertz Manero, who's the Attorney General of Mexico, said that it was again fabricated, that DEA did this. So all of a sudden they're protecting a corrupt official and then damaging DEA by saying that we fabricated evidence, that there was nothing there. And later on, what they did is they sanctioned DEA and all U.S. law enforcement agencies that work in Mexico by saying, okay, we are going to limit you to giving information to the Mexican government. Well, you can't give them all the information because some of that is so sensitive it's going to compromise informants, operations, investigations, and even agents. So we couldn't do that. Number two, they took away diplomatic immunity. This is, some of the most violent cartels operating in the country, and now we have no diplomatic immunity. Then the other thing that they did is they said, okay, any Mexican official that has contact with DEA, FBI, or anybody, they have to write a report. Well, who's going to want to write a report, several times a day? So they're not going to take your calls to avoid writing those reports. So what's going to happen is going to affect tactical operations. So if you have information that a aircraft is coming in from Colombia, it's going to land in Campeche, and you can't get a hold of anybody, that's the end of that. Then the next thing that he did is he did away with the Plan Merida, which was a bilateral initiative where we were giving them a lot of money. We gave them about $3.3 billion to buy helicopters, to buy aircraft, to do training, to reform their judicial system, to gather intelligence. And that was started in 2008 under Felipe Calderón. But López Obrador never liked Felipe Calderón because he lost the presidency to him by about 64,000 votes, and then he claimed that it was fraud, it was padded votes and what have you. So did away with Plan Merida. Next thing that happened is, he did away with the sensitive investigative unit, where we basically train a cadre of Mexican security forces, and then we send them up to Quantico for a 5-week training. We vet them, polygraph, background, so that we can pass them very sensitive information. And there was a problem because Mexico never allowed us to vet people that were heading up those units or were on top of those units. So that was a frailty of that, a weakness. And we had a problem with one of the commanders that was leaking information. So he threw out the baby with the bathwater. The next thing that he did, was the most recent thing he did, is he took away space for the DEA aircraft, the King Air, twin-engine King Air, that we had in Toluca, just south of Mexico City. So we had to remove that aircraft and move it to Texas. And that aircraft served a purpose, not only for transporting DEA, but Mexican security forces. And right now, you have a lot of cartels, as you know, Mark, that are fighting for control of Michoacan, Guanajuato, Zacatecas. So you can't travel on the road because they have roadblocks. So it's very dangerous for DEA to be running around there out there on the roads. So that was the latest venture, and I don't see things getting any better during this sexennial. And Lopez Obrador still has 3 years to go. So we're probably going to have to wait until a new president comes in to be able to reestablish those efforts that it took us decades and decades to basically foment.
So you brought up Bill Barr and the Trump administration back in 2000, the most recent uh, uh, administration. What's going on currently with? Has anything changed since Biden got elected president? Has he changed any way of investigating things or taking care of problems down in Mexico? What's his relationship?
Well, his relationship is good, but again, when he was elected president, one of the few world leaders that didn't call him to congratulate him was Lopez Obrador. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to be a little bit more humane along the border. He's trying to clean up the corruption in the Northern Triangle, which generates a lot of the individuals that are coming to the border. For example, we recently indicted Juan Orlando Hernandez, the ex-president of Honduras. And he and his brother, Tony, who was also a congressman, basically started to do state-sponsored drug trafficking. And they were bringing in, tons and tons of cocaine via the aircraft, go-fast boat, not only from Colombia, but also from Venezuela. And then they were using members of the security forces, politicians, empresarios or businessmen to basically engage in this whole process. And Juan Orlando Hernandez was recently extradited to the United States. He's pending trial. But you really can't do anything in those areas until you clean up the corruption. For example, we gave Honduras money. And what they did is they said, oh, we spent $6,000 on a few trailers, which probably cost them maybe $100,000, to treat people during the pandemic. And then you also have corruption in El Salvador. You have corruption in Guatemala. So until you clean that up, and basically develop the infrastructure there, things are not going to change. And we created a lot of that situation because in the late 1980s, we started to expel members of the Mara Salvatrucha or the MS-13 back to those areas. And the problem is that they didn't have the infrastructure to deal with them, so they proliferated like locusts, in not only within the prisons but outside, and then they started to traffic in drugs, murder for hire, extortion, kidnapping. So you can't blame a lot of those people because they're fleeing for their lives. They're afraid for their lives. There's no jobs. Then you have other issues like hurricanes that have slammed into that area, causing a major problem with the economy. So, we have to get away from the theatrics of the border. We have to basically deal with these people, and we have to deal with these situations in Central America and Mexico that the United States created. The United States created that. And when you had the United Fruit Company and we propped up dictatorships in these countries, we gave them weapons, and it was not a very righteous thing, and now we're paying for the price, and then we have the audacity to complain.
Well, you bring up a point. I mean, during the last administration, it seems like the news was constantly talking about all the immigrants coming in from Guatemala, El Salvador. They're just immigrating in waves, coming to trying to get to America. I haven't seen any coverage about that at all. Did they just give up once Biden became president? They said, "Oh, we don't want to go to America anymore," or did the media just stop covering it, or what do you think's going
Well,
on with that?
I think that the situation still exists. I think that most of the people that come into the United States, don't try to make it across the border. Most of them come in with legitimate visas, and then they overstay their visas. The other people, it's kind of like the stay in Mexico program. Um, but a border wall is not going to stop anything. And for anybody to think that a border wall is going to stop drugs, no, because most of the drugs come in through the legitimate land ports of entry, the biggest one being Tijuana, San Diego. And then you have a bunch of tunnels that basically penetrate the southwest border. Recently, they found a tunnel that was the length of 6 football
I
fields.
heard about that.
It had, electricity. It had a rail system. It had ventilation, and it just goes to show because that area between Tijuana and Otay Mesa, near the San Diego area, where you have a lot of warehouses, is some of the most fortified border area in the United States and Mexico. And the wall did nothing to stop that.
So it seems like for every tunnel they find, there's 100 more that haven't even been discovered. It's almost like they say, okay, here's a tunnel. We've used it for years. It's time to we'll let you have that one because we've already built a nicer one with
Well,
the
well, you're
elevator.
you're right, Mark, because since about 1990 they found 200 tunnels,
Wow.
along the southwest border. Most of them are in Arizona and in California. Some of them are very sophisticated. There's others that, what they do is they tunnel and then they take advantage of the drainage system to move drugs through there. The other day there was an individual that, had his bedroom on top of a tunnel that was going through his property, and the thing caved in, and the guy fell into the hole.
So they just innocently were, he was innocent party to this whole
Yeah, he
thing.
was
They just
an
happened to be
innocent
tunneling
party.
under his
He-
house.
they just built a tunnel under his house, but when you build those tunnels, for most of them, you run one load, a big load, and it pays for that tunnel. It'll
Yeah.
pay for that tunnel. And the guy that was known as the king of the tunnels was Joaquin,
Chapo.
yeah, the Chapo Guzman Loera. And what he was doing, Mark, is he was sending a lot of his tunnel rats or tunnel diggers to Germany to some of the better tunneling schools. And they would use what they called total station. You've seen the surveying equipment where these guys go out, and they're surveying, and,
Yes.
and they have the little telescope and they have the bob and they're holding it there. Well, this is very sophisticated because GPS does not work underground. So what they use is this total station, and it shoots out a laser to a prism, and then it bounces it back, and it gives you an idea of the direction that you're heading, and then it takes into consideration the curvature of the earth.
Wow.
And that is basically the system that they use to tunnel Chapo Guzman out of the most maximum secure penitentiary in Mexico, which was Altiplano. And they built a tunnel that was a mile long, so that gives you an idea right into Chapo Guzman's cell.
Well, obviously that took a lot of money and some tunnel expertise, but there had to be a lot of inside help to make that thing happen. I mean,
Well,
how could you not hear all that going on underneath the prisons for weeks.
Well, there was, and then they had to have the floor plans because as they're building the tunnel underneath the prison, you have rebar, as they're setting concrete and what have you, and then they started to pound out a 20-inch by 20-inch hole in Chapus Mancell, and the pounding was so loud that the other prisoners were yelling and screaming, but the control area where the guards were, they just ignored it. And there was video. There was a video. There was audio. And they didn't show up at his cell for about 35 minutes. By that time, Chapus Man had gotten on a motorcycle on a rail, and he was out of there.
Yeah, 35 minutes to travel a mile. Yeah, he was long gone.
And then they took him to a clandestine airstrip. There was an aircraft waiting for him. They took him to the mountains of Culiacan that he knew very like the back of his hand.
So BL2 is a fan of yours. He's watching from Arizona, Tucson, Arizona. He's just want to give you a shout out. And
What is this?
he's using the name BL2. BL2 man. We don't know who that is, but he's obviously a fan of yours and fan of your work, and says that you were a good agent. So possibly someone that you worked with.
Well, my
read your book.
regards.
I mean, you've got quite the resume, so I wouldn't doubt it if it's somebody that.
Well,
that
my
you met.
regards to the people in Arizona, and I've got an interview with Law Matters. This is going to be, I think, July 2nd. So I'll be interviewed by Law Matters there in Arizona. So that'll be great.
So let's talk about that a little bit. You have in your retirement, almost you're busier in your retirement life than you were when you were working. You're always on a show. It's every day you have some camera crew in your house or at some studio somewhere that you're doing a show or a special show for HBO or Netflix or CNN or I mean the names are just out there. Just you've had so many different interviews. I mean, what is it? Is it something you enjoy doing? Talking about that?
I do because I look at it as an educational process, and I think that people really need to be educated as to what's taking place because most people, they watch TV and they see, these cop shows where you see a SWAT truck rolling up to a house and, these guys charge out yelling and screaming. They throw everybody on the floor. And then, one of the guys comes out and he says, "Hey, boss, we hit the mother lode and it's a lid of grass." and people need to understand that there's traffickers out there that are dealing tons and tons of cocaine at a time. I'll give you an example. You've heard of the Lord of the Skies,
Yes.
Amado Carrillo Fuentes, who was the head of the Tijuana cartel at one time. And he was buying French-made Caravels and DC-9 passenger or commercial aircraft and smuggling drugs. And these aircraft travel at about 400 or 500 nautical miles an hour. The only thing that can keep up with them is a jet fighter. So they would come in, and on one occasion, we had the aircraft to intercept, but we had to stagger them to be able to track. And we had Cessna Citation 2 aircraft equipped with forward-looking infrared and F-16 radar. And on one occasion, one of those big aircraft landed in the Chihuahua Desert, right in the desert. And, the flare allowed us to see about 75 people providing protection to that aircraft. They offloaded, we know, probably about 15 tons of cocaine. They loaded about $40 million as a down payment because we had wire intercepts that were going on, and they refueled that plane in about 10 minutes, and it was gone.
I thought you were going to say they abandoned the plane in the middle of the desert.
Sometimes they did, and the thing is that they were expendable because these aircraft were used aircraft, and they were buying them fairly inexpensive, one load, and they were paid for. But it's really an interesting situation. On another case, we were tracking a citizen from Sweden, and he was meeting with Mexican drug dealers in the state of Sinaloa, and we were following him around. And we saw him going to the dock, and they were looking at two fishing vessels. I still remember the names: the Mardoqueo and the Daniel Torres. So the ships left, and they went to the Galapagos Islands. And later they started to come up. We're tracking them with a U.S. submarine and then also U.S. Coast Guard cutters. And as they start to approach Mexican territorial waters, I get a call from the Coast Guard. Before that, I get a call from the admiral in Jayadif West, which was in Alameda, California. And he said, "Look, we want to take it down. We're going to lose it." And I said, "You can't take it down. We're going to end up with a pile of dope, which is not bad, but the Mexican government is not going to prosecute anybody unless they seize those drugs." So he said, "Okay, it's on your head. You take the chance." So I've always been a calculated gambler, I should say that. So it came up as it was nearing the waters of Mexico. I get a call from Coast Guard. They said, "We're going to lose it." So I called the Mexican government, and they did a lot of things for me, because they would allow U.S. aircraft in hot pursuit of other suspect aircraft to come into Mexican airspace.
Wow.
With one phone call. And if they were running low on fuel, they would say, "Have them go to Acapulco. We'll have somebody waiting. They'll refuel them, but tell them to get the hell out of there before the media sees them." So anyway, they gave me permission. The Coast Guard cutter came in. We sent out some of the Mexican federales on a dilapidated little boat. Took them, I don't know how long to get out there. They pulled the Mardoqueo into shore, and it was late at night. In the morning, the comandante comes to me and he said, "We can't find it. Can't find any drugs." And I said, "Well, focus your attention to this guy here who was a bartender at some bar." So he goes over there and he punches him in the stomach. Well, that's not what I had in mind.
Got his attention.
Got his attention, and he points to the hold. And in the hold, the hold was covered with heavy metal plates, very hard to lift. So we took one of them off, and there was a hole cut into it where the bales of cocaine fit perfectly through that hole. And we seized off of that Mardoqueo about, I'd say about at least 7 tons of cocaine. We then were able to intercept the Daniel Torres as it was moving up towards the Sea of Cortez, and seized another over 7 tons of from the Daniel Torres. The whole seizure came out to about 15 tons of cocaine. So this is the capacity of a lot of these drug trafficking organizations. And the thing now is that they're starting to move away from plant-based drugs like marijuana or opium, that produces opium and heroin, opium poppies. And they're going into synthetic drugs, fentanyl, and then also methamphetamine. And last year, during a 12-month time frame, ending in April of 2021, we lost over 100,000 citizens from the United States to drug overdoses. Most of them were from fentanyl. And it's very easy to produce. They're getting the precursor chemicals from China. And so they're not taking, it's risk, it's taken a lot of risk away from them, because, Now they don't have to worry about the opium poppies or the marijuana fields being fumigated.
Mm.
And, they talk about super labs, but they're really not super labs. What they use is these stainless steel tubs, and they mix, the precursor chemicals with a, paddle and dry it. And, you have your fentanyl, you have your methamphetamine. But the problem is that they're lacing everything with fentanyl. So the drug users in the United States don't know that they're taking fentanyl. So that's why it's very important for the state government, even the federal government, to give some of these, test kits, so that a drug addict, if he's using cocaine, that he can test it to make sure that there's no fentanyl in there. We need to, provide, people with or healthcare providers with naloxone or Narcan that reverses drug overdoses. And the treatment has got to be a lot better, because we detox people, and then we send them out. There's no follow up, and then they go back to the same neighborhoods and they get addicted probably within 2 weeks. And the other thing also is we need to do a better job with demand reduction. What I would recommend is that, this issue of teaching kids about the ills of drug abuse should be put into the school curriculums. Because I remember when I was in school, you would have a police officer or somebody from the school once a year that would talk about drug abuse, and then that was it. People would forget about it. And then the families, the church, schools, everybody has got to get involved, because this issue of drug abuse is not something that we're going to be able to arrest our way out of. It's gonna take a huge effort, and unless we reduce the demand for drugs here in the United States, if it's not Mexico or Colombia, it's going to be another country.
Let's talk about fentanyl a little bit. Why did it get so popular? What is it about that? And it's taken over the world. It seems like lately, and like you said, the 100,000 people killed. What is it about fentanyl? What is it?
Well, we've had an opioid crisis for a long time, and that started with the pharmaceutical companies, like in the 1990s. You take a look at Purdue Pharma with the Sackler family that created OxyContin. And then, they duped the American public by saying that it was not addictive because it had a time release quality to it, but it was highly addictive. And what they were doing is they were targeting doctors that prescribed a lot of drugs, and then they were giving them trips to different places, giving them a lot of bennies so that they could promote OxyContin, because one of the Sackler brothers was a genius when it came to marketing. So that is basically what kicked off the opioid crises. And then we went from that to heroin. And then all of a sudden, we went into fentanyl, because it's very cheap, and it is 50 times stronger than heroin. So
50 times.
50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than opium. So it was a bigger bang for the buck for the drug addict, and it was readily available. 2 milligrams of fentanyl, which is the equivalent mark of, a couple of grains of salt, can be lethal to a human being. And the cartels are, making it into pill form in many cases. And, they label it, like it's Xanax, Percocet, other drugs. So the user doesn't know that he's using a very, very, very lethal drug, fentanyl. And the seizures that have been taking place on the border, there's been enough fentanyl seized with sufficient capacity to kill every human being in the United States.
Wow, that's scary, and it's doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon. Like you said, it's just
It is not going away, and we have to really ensure. I also believe in harm reduction. Where if you have a drug addict, that he can go use the drug. Where there's clinicians or healthcare providers to make sure facts, and at the same time provide them with test strips so that they know that their drugs of choice are not laced. The issue with harm reduction is to be able to save lives.
yeah. The problem with that is a lot of people addicted to drugs. They take it. They take their word for it when they get drugs that it is what they say it is, and the fact that it's laced with fentanyl, they have no clue. But for them to be doing tests on the side of they just want to get high. They don't have time to be testing, and then
Well, that is going to lead to their death.
yeah,
I can
no,
assure you,
I agree, but
because and I know what you mean. If they are suffering from withdrawals, they're not going to wait to test the drugs. But if they don't,
it's a death sentence.
you might as well be. You stand a better chance of survival if you're playing Russian roulette.
Well, that's what it sounds like it is, and it's a scary thing, and the fact that it's being mass produced and so easily and it's readily available, and it basically it makes the high higher for people, and that's why it's become so popular.
And then during the pandemic, we saw a huge surge in drug abuse. The isolation, social isolation. A lot of people were grieving, over lost family members or friends, and the uncertainty, maybe loss of jobs or what have you. So, there was an increase in drug abuse, or drug use, I should say, and some of that was fentanyl. But fentanyl is a very, very, very deadly drug.
Well, on that note, I think we're gonna wrap it up. We've kind of discussed some trends going on down south, politics. We've talked about some drugs, and the effects that it's having
The
on
the
the American population. Uh,
the other thing that I should mention very quickly is the violence that's taking place in Mexico right now. In January, there was a little village called San Jose de Gracia in Michoacan, where these probably members of the Jalisco New Generation
hmm
cartel went to a funeral, lined up all these individuals, pretty much like the St. Valentine's Day massacre, shot and killed about probably at least 17 people
During a funeral.
during a funeral service. And then what they did is they took all the bodies, they washed the blood off the sidewalk, and the only thing that was left there was a little plastic bag with human brains in it,
Oh my
and
God!
then the shell casings. So the police got there hours later, and there was really no evidence to be found
It was
other
all
than the
cleaned up.
shell casings. And then in March, they went to a palenque, which is illegal cockfighting in the state of Michoacan, and they used a potato chip truck, Sabritas, which is a Mexican potato chip company, to block part of the road. They went in there and started blasting and killed about 20 individuals at that palenque. There were bodies all over there were little rivers of blood flowing, throughout that little auditorium. And that is the type of violence that Mexico is currently suffering from. And we, again, need to do a better job here of controlling weapons, because 70% of the weapons that are flowing into Mexico, primarily into the hands of the Mexican cartels, are coming from the United States. So you have drugs flowing north and you have weapons flowing south.
Well, it's that's a whole other topic for another day. Is weapons and drugs are never a good mix, but in the violent
Absolutely.
world of the cartels. It's an absolutely
Absolutely.
necessity, and we get it. Violence is out of control down there, and I don't know what the answer is. I mean, we talk about leadership on that side, but they've had so many different administrations trying to tackle this. It's almost like it's a hopeless cause.
Well, the current administration believes in hugs and not gunshots, and that has led to the fact to more violence and to the cartels operating with greater impunity. So, like I said, none of that is going to change until we get a new president in Mexico,
And we're 3 years away from that.
and we're 3 years away, and it's a long time.
So they're on the. It sounds like they're kind of on the same cycle as the United States presidency. Then so
The Mexican president serves for 6 years.
6 years. Okay,
6 years.
It just happened to coincide.
Here it's 4 years, plus you can get reelected for 4 years. So they can still do a lot of damage in 6 years.
Oh yeah.
But the problem is, too, that with 6 years, they may want to do changes, but they're not going to be able to do it. And then you're going to get another president coming in Mexico that may change everything or destroy everything that the former president did.
Somebody's asking about the missing schoolgirls. Is that something that sounds familiar?
Are they talking about the missing students that are still missing, the 43 missing students?
I guess so. What's that about? I guess I.
Well, the thing is, if that's what they're talking about, there was a situation where you had a leftist university where these kids were studying to be teachers. And every year, what they would do is they would hijack buses to go to Mexico City. So what happened is they went into a village and they hijacked these buses. The police basically started shooting at them, and they removed them from the bus. They piled them up into police cars, and they took him out and they turned him over to this cartel known as the Guerreros Unidos. And they killed them. The bodies have never been found. There was one individual that was found on the street in that village, and they had basically sliced off his face.
So they left one body behind and sent it basically a message that
And
this
well,
is the fate of
they were
everybody.
piling them up, and the fact is that there's rumors, there's nothing that's been verified, that they were smuggling heroin in those buses. So they figured that they were trying to steal the heroin, but the fact of the matter is that that has never been solved. And I don't think that it's ever going to be solved. They've dug up burial sites, but not of those students. But Mexico right now is pockmarked with unmarked cemeteries, so it still hasn't been solved, which is
So there's no
absolutely
closure.
insane. But there's also some information that says that the military also played a role in that, because there was a military base there in that area.
That's horrible. So it sounds like the police were involved, the military's involved.
Correct.
I mean,
And then a cover up.
and then a cover up to this day.
Correct.
Well, that's the world. That's the world we live in, I guess, and it's not going to change anytime soon. But it's a fascinating topic, and that's why we get you in here to talk about this stuff, and we appreciate your time as always.
Well, the pleasure's all mine, and thank you so much for having me. It's always very interesting. I love your questions because it makes the the interview that much better.
Well, we're gonna do it more often. We get so busy in this world with our naive ways of what's going on in the world, and we forget that there's still things going on down south that people just don't understand, and we have to kind of bring it up and let people know, hey, this is not a problem just in Mexico. It affects us too.
Correct.
And it's something that we got to get a handle on and talk about, or it's just going to get out of control. So we'll have you on again, and
Well, thank you so much.
it's good to have a
Mark,
legend locally that we can just grab and say, "Come on down," and we can just talk for an hour, 30 minutes.
Oh,
Whatever.
we could talk all day.
Oh,
but,
we could.
We
got
we can
stuff to do.
separate it. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thanks again.
Well, thank you.
Good to see you, Mr.
Thank you so much.
Vigil. And thanks, guys, for tuning in. It's always a pleasure to have guys tuning in for this stuff. And if you guys have any questions for us, send us some messages, topics you want to talk about. We'll definitely try to get to it. And anything you want to discuss, we'll bring it to Mr. Vigil, and we'll go from there. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.